Have you ever caught yourself thinking, I'm not the man I used to be? Or maybe, after 60, all that's left is just getting through the days. These thoughts speak quietly, but they chip away at your strength, your self-worth, and even your health. Today, I want to talk about 5 beliefs that silently drain a man's confidence and energy after 60, and more importantly, how to replace them. This isn't about philosophy. It's about feeling like yourself again. No pills, no ego, just real-life steps that work. Let's start with one belief I hear far too often. If I'm not working, I'm not worth much. It's a quiet thought, but it's one that digs deep, especially for men who've spent their whole lives building, fixing, providing. After 60, when retirement comes or work slows down, that feeling of purpose can shift, and for many, it disappears altogether. You might wake up without a schedule, sit at the table and wonder, what now? Who am I without my job, my title, my tools? The truth is, this belief isn't about laziness or weakness. It's about identity. For decades, society, and often our own families, have measured our worth by what we do. But the value of a man doesn't end when the job does. It just needs to be seen in a new light. And sometimes it takes a small moment to realize that. I remember George clearly, a 68-year-old from Cleveland who came to me not for anything medical, but because, as he said, I just feel like a shadow lately. George had worked as a car mechanic for over 40 years, hands always busy, clothes always stained, and pride in every engine he fixed. But once he retired, that energy turned into restlessness. He was short-tempered, slept poorly, and kept to himself. Nobody needs me anymore, he said, half laughing, but his eyes told the truth. What changed for George wasn't some grand breakthrough. It was a conversation with his 9-year-old granddaughter. She had written him a little note on a napkin that said, "Grandpa, I love how you listen to me. You're the calmest person I know." That napkin stayed in his wallet. It was the first time in months he saw that he was still needed, not for oil changes, but for his quiet presence. Another man, Alan, 72 from Boise, had a similar story. He had been a high school principal and thought once he stopped leading, he'd fade into the background. But when he started helping kids with homework at the local library, he realized they didn't care about his title. They cared that he showed up and believed in them. For both of them, the shift wasn't about going back to doing, but about recognizing how deeply they were valued just by being. What often helps, and it's incredibly simple, is to write down 3 qualities your loved ones appreciate in you. Not your skills, but your qualities. Things like, you make me feel safe, or you always know what to say, or even, you're the one I go to when I'm scared. Ask your partner, your kids, your grandkids, then tape that. List somewhere visible, your fridge, your mirror, your nightstand. Let those words remind you who you still are. Your worth isn't hanging in a garage, sitting in a briefcase, or lost in a paycheck. It's in how you're remembered, how you make people feel, and what they carry with them after they leave the room. And sometimes the strongest kind of presence is the quietest one. You're still needed, you're still loved. Even when your hands are at rest, your heart is still doing the work. Here's another belief I hear more than I'd like. I've got to handle this myself. I shouldn't bother anyone. This one hits hard because it sounds noble, even responsible. For a lot of men over 60, especially those raised to be strong, asking for help can feel like admitting failure. But the truth is, the older we get, the more dangerous this mindset becomes. Studies show that isolation is as harmful to your health as smoking or obesity. And emotional stress that stays bottled up doesn't just go away, it builds up in the body. High blood pressure, poor sleep, fatigue, even lower testosterone. I see all of that in men who try to carry emotional weight silently. If you're reading this and thinking, but what else am I supposed to do? And then I want to share something with you from real life, because you're far from the only one who's felt this way. I remember Frank well, 72 years old, retired firefighter from Tulsa. He came to see me 6 months after losing his wife. I asked him if he had someone to talk to, and he just shook his head and said, "That's not how I was raised." He didn't want to be a burden to his adult kids, and most of his friends had either passed or drifted apart. He kept saying he was fine, but his body told a different story. High cortisol levels, constant tension in his shoulders, waking up at 3 a.m. with no idea why. I suggested he try a local support group just to sit and listen. He hesitated, then said, "I'll go once, but I'm not talking." And that one visit changed everything. He didn't say a word the first 2 times, just listened. But by the 3rd meeting, he found himself sharing a story about the first time he met his wife. A month later, he told me he didn't feel as alone anymore. Not because he found a solution, but because he let someone walk beside him through the pain. Another man, Chuck, 67 from Sacramento, just started texting his neighbor every Sunday after church. Nothing deep, just a "how's your week?" But he told me those little check-ins made him feel human again. What helps most men take the first step is something simple. Try sending a message to someone you trust, maybe a neighbor, an old coworker, or even your brother, and just ask, "How are you doing?" You don't need to bring up your own problems right away. Sometimes, connection begins by showing interest in someone else. And when the moment feels right, you'll be surprised how easy it is to share your own thoughts too. I always say this, strength isn't about silence, it's about honesty. A strong man isn't the one who carries it all. He's the one who knows when it's time to hand someone the other end of the load. Reaching out isn't weakness. It's the most courageous thing you can do, especially when your body and mind need connection more than ever. Even a small step towards someone can open a door you didn't realize was closed. You don't have to walk through this part of life alone. Let me gently bring up a belief that weighs heavier than most men care to admit. If I'm not performing like I used to, I must not be a real man anymore. It's a quiet thought that shows up when you least expect it. Maybe you notice a lack of desire, or things just don't work the way they once did, and suddenly that voice creeps in. Maybe I'm broken. The truth is, changes in intimacy after 60 are natural and common, but many men mistake those changes for a loss of identity. Testosterone does gradually decline with age, blood flow becomes more sensitive to stress, medications play a role, and so does fatigue, but none of that means you're done or less than. Often, what hurts men most isn't the physical change itself, but the silence around it. No one talks about the emotional side, the loss of closeness, the shame, the worry, and that silence creates distance between partners, right at the time when connection matters most. One man I've worked with, Henry, 66 from Raleigh, came to me after months of avoiding even small touches with his wife. He wasn't angry, just tired and frustrated. "I feel like a roommate, not a husband," he said. He told me he had no interest in intimacy anymore, and that scared him more than any illness. I asked if he had shared this with his wife. He shook his head. What would I even say? But when he finally did sit down with her, not to talk about the problem, but simply to share what he missed about being close, something shifted. He told her he missed how they used to laugh in bed before falling asleep, and how he felt most alive when they'd hold hands in the morning. She cried, not because she was hurt, but because she had been feeling the same way and thought he had lost interest in her. From there, they didn't fix everything overnight, but they found new ways to be close, slower, warmer, and more emotionally connected than before. Another client, Lewis, 70 from Denver, started writing small notes to his wife again. Nothing fancy, just little reminders of what he appreciated about her. And that opened up a gentle kind of romance that had nothing to do with performance. What often helps, and it's easier than most expect, is to begin by telling your partner what you still love about her. Not what's missing, not what's wrong, but what you notice, admire, and enjoy. "I love how you smile when you talk about the grandkids," or "I still think of our first trip to the lake," or even just, "I sleep better when I know you're next to me." That's the doorway back to connection, and it has nothing to do with perfection. I always remind my patients that intimacy isn't a test you pass or fail. It's not about performance, it's about presence. You're still attractive, still worthy, and still capable of deep connection, not because of what your body does, but because of the heart you bring to the moment. Even small warmth builds trust again. Even gentle words light the spark. You don't need to be who you were at 30 to be deeply loved at 70. Here's a belief that's quietly drained more men than most people realize. I've got to stay strong, no matter what. You've probably heard that phrase your whole life, maybe from your father, maybe from a coach, or maybe just from the way men are expected to act. Be tough, don't cry, hold it in. But what no one says out loud is how heavy that silence becomes, especially as we age. When you go through illness, loss, or just the daily changes of getting older, and you feel like you can't show it, that pressure doesn't disappear. It settles in your body as stress, and over time, that stress turns into trouble sleeping, irritability, low energy, even heart issues. I see this all the time in men who've been strong their whole lives, only to find themselves struggling alone when things start to feel out of their control. What we often forget is that being strong doesn't mean never feeling. It means not letting those feelings sink the ship silently. Bob, one of my longtime patients, is a perfect example. He's 74 now, lives in Fort Worth, and survived a stroke last year. On the outside, he recovered well, walked without a cane, got his speech back, kept up with his yard work. But his daughter brought him in to see me, saying something felt off. He was snapping at his grandkids, couldn't sleep, had stomach problems. When I asked him how he was feeling emotionally, he shrugged and said, "Fine, I just need to toughen up." I knew that line. I'd heard it hundreds of times. But then he told me something that stuck with me. He said, "I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid they'll see me fall apart." A week later, something changed. He told me that one night, while trying to read a book to his grandson, he broke down crying. His words slurred a little, and he just couldn't push through. He felt humiliated until his grandson leaned in and hugged him and said, "You're still my hero, Grandpa." That moment broke the dam. After that, Bob started keeping a little notebook by his bed. Every night, just 2 questions. What made me smile today? What made me feel sad? And slowly, the tension eased. He didn't turn into someone else. He just let a little air out of the pressure valve. What often helps, and I've seen this, work for many men, is journaling in a very simple way. You don't need to write long essays or share it with anyone. Just grab a small notepad or your phone and, at the end of the day, write down one thing that brought you peace and one thing that bothered you. It can be a sentence. It's not about being poetic. It's about noticing what's going on inside instead of carrying it all silently. I often say that real strength is like the roots of a tree. It's not what everyone sees on the outside, but what holds you steady underneath. When you name your emotions, you're not being weak, you're being grounded. And when the storm comes, a grounded man doesn't fall. He bends, he breathes, and he keeps standing. You're allowed to feel, and you're still strong, especially when you do. Let's talk about one belief that sneaks in quietly but does real damage. At my age, it's too late to start something new. This is one I hear more often than you'd think. Not always spoken directly, but hidden behind phrases like, "I missed my chance," or "that ship has sailed." The truth is, this belief doesn't come from laziness. It comes from years of being told that growth, excitement, and learning belong to the young, but science and experience says otherwise. Your brain remains capable of forming new connections throughout your life. Your body may move slower, but it still responds to challenge and purpose. The real danger is not age. It's the belief that age means stopping. And I've seen that once a person accepts that idea, they start shrinking their days instead of filling them. But the men who reject it, even gently, often find that their later years become their most meaningful. Walter is a perfect example. He's 70, lives in Milwaukee, and had always dreamed of playing guitar. Not on stage, not professionally, just to sit on his porch and play a song he loved. But for decades, he kept telling himself it was too late, that he'd look silly, that his fingers were too stiff. Then one day, after hearing a kid play at his grandson's school concert, he went home and ordered a cheap used guitar online. He didn't tell anyone. He just started practicing 5 minutes a day, slowly, clumsily, painfully at first. I saw him 2 months later, and he looked different, more relaxed, more alive. Not because he had suddenly become great at guitar, but because he was finally doing something that made him feel curious again. A year later, he was playing simple songs for the residents at his retirement home. "It's not about the music," he told me. "It's about the fact that I proved I wasn't done yet." Another man, Jerry, 68 from Santa Fe, started volunteering at an animal shelter after retirement, something he'd always thought about but never dared to try. Now he says it's the best part of his week. These men didn't reverse time. They just stopped letting it dictate what they could or couldn't do. One of the simplest ways to challenge the too late mindset is to sit down and write 3 things you've always wanted to try, no matter how small or silly they might seem. Learning a new skill, taking a class, joining a group, building something with your hands. Then pick just one and take the first step. Watch a video, make a phone call, or put it on your calendar. You don't have to commit to mastering it. Just begin. I always say time doesn't walk away from you. It waits for you to walk toward it. You're not too old to grow. You're not too late to try. The door you thought was closed might have been open the whole time. It just needed a knock. And even small steps can lead to a path you didn't think was still yours to walk. If any part of these stories feels familiar, then you're not alone. Leave a comment below. Which of these beliefs have you heard in your own life? And which piece of advice spoke to you most? Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. We talk here about things no one else talks about, but that really matter. And above all, You're not alone, you're still strong, and life keeps going if you choose to hold it in your own hands.